And with the great and enthusiastic help of Kay from the library here, we have decided to put together a series of talks on brain health, and more specifically probably on how to prevent Alzheimer's disease. So this is the second meeting, the second talk we are having. Last time, just to recap, we actually introduced the brain, and I'll say something about that in a minute, but some housekeeping rules. I'm happy with anyone who needs to come in and out, so don't just stretch your bladders too much. If you need to go or drink, or anyone can drink or eat here, that's fine. Try to keep the place clean. No smoking, don't do drugs, and no alcohol in the room. We'll be talking about alcohol in 2 weeks, so just hold it for now. If anything is unclear, as my accent clearly indicates, I'm not a born native English speaker, just raise your hand and I'll try to be more clear. Or if anything needs further details or explanation, just stop me and we'll do that. Basically, we are the library closes at 8, but we are supposed to leave the room by 6:30. We just managed that last time. We'll see how we go today, because originally Kay and I felt that 50 minutes are sort of a good attention span, but last time we managed to go longer. We'll see how we do today. No need to take notes. The presentation can be downloaded to your disk on his or memory sticks from the computer here, or sent to you by email if you want to. And in any case, whatever I say is probably mistaken. Whatever is written down is closer to the truth. Any issues or questions which are unresolved from our meeting fortnight ago? Fine. Oh, yay. Please.
Dr. Barak, after we'd finished, you'd given the interview 2 weeks ago, and I happened to go home and turn on, it was Prime Rocks, and it was a tribute to, now I'm going to have a memory block on his name, so I'm showing my Glenn Campbell, which was so apropos to what you had been talking about and music. And I don't know if you ever managed to, whether you see it on YouTube or how you can, if you haven't seen that program, that's an absolute must. It's 2 hours worth, but it's 2 hours of him having been diagnosed at the Mayo Clinic in 2011 and going on tour for a year until they cried quits. 2012, he was on a bus across the United States of America, and the family made the call when he was just he was talking more on stage than performing with his guitar and music. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for that. And we will be mentioning another important, probably life-changing movie, actually by Kurosawa, the great Japanese director and producer. But we'll mention that later when we get to Purpose in Life tonight. And if I forget, you'll remind me to talk about that movie. But thank you for that.
You did say that we could access on the, get it on our email.
Yeah.
How do we get that?
Well, either Kay will send it out, or just write to me at my email at the university. Yeah. You can find my email on the university website. I'd be happy to send it. Someone did. I just got an email this morning for someone who won't be here today and said, can you send me the data? So I did. No problem at all. Use it, print it, whatever. Just make sure the message goes to everyone, because we need our brains healthy. And without further delay, we were actually supposed to talk today about brain food. That's what Kate tells me. But for some reason I got stuck on the social brain, and that's what I sent her yesterday evening. And so we will be talking about the brilliant development of the MIND diet by the American government in 2 weeks. And Kay said, well, will everyone have to be starving until then? And I said, it's a good strategy to extend your lifespan. Actually, the only strategy that has ever been proven to extend the lifespan is starving. So please do drink, you need your hydration, but if you cannot eat for the next 2 weeks, you are contributing to your brain health, and maybe to live longer. Although what's the use of living longer if you can't have a good meal? Anyway, we'll be talking about food in 2 weeks. It's going to be probably upsetting, but we'll get to that. But today we're talking about the social brain in the context of preventing Alzheimer's disease, but also in the context of brain health. So just a sentence about what we started off with last week. We sort of had a bit of an introduction to the brain, which is the sexy organ within our skulls, about just under 1.5 kilograms of very, 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 very fatty tissue made up of billions and billions and hundreds of billions of cells, which not only die as we go through the life cycle, but they can also be regenerated and new ones can be created if we treat our brains and our bodies properly. So we were talking about different issues which have to do with maintaining brain health, which are a general good maintenance measure for our brains, and we ended by mentioning Zen, Japanese and Korean Zen meditation as probably the most important strategies to actually keep our brains younger than our chronological age by about 20 years. So that was a tip for everyone who wants to keep their brains younger. I don't know any tips about keeping our skin or look younger. You'll need to talk to a plastic surgeon about that. But today we will have another tip, and this will be handouts for everyone at the end on how to keep our bodies about 2.5 years younger than our chronological age, which is not as much as 20 years, but it's certainly nice to be able to do that. And that's sort of recent research which was published this week, and that's probably why I was focusing on purpose in life and the social brain. But at the end of our talk last week, there was a question about what is Alzheimer's disease, because if we are going to focus on preventing Alzheimer's disease, we sort of need to be on the same page and define that, which makes it quite a challenge. So let's talk about epidemiology first, why we need to focus about Alzheimer's disease, and then get on with defining it. Demographically, the world is aging, which I think is brilliant because I do old age psychiatry, and that's the only thing that I really know anything about. So for me, anyone who makes it across the sort of the barrier of 65 years and older becomes a potential client, which I really like the idea of. But no, seriously, the world is aging. Both the what we call the first world, or the industrialized, or the Western, or the modern, or whatever you want to call it, world. But there are great changes in the demographics and life expectancy also in non-industrialized sort of third world countries like China and India. And on average, our increased longevity is a blessing, but it doesn't come without a price. It does indeed. So just a week ago, the UK government estimated that for the increase in our longevity comes with both good and bad news. The good news is that on average, we will be spending 2.5 years more independently in old age. The bad news is that we'll be spending about 2 years in very high dependency as we age and as our life expectancy increases. So there is going to be quite a burden on society for those of us who will be very dependent on external caretakers, but also on families and partners where low dependency years are added to our lives, but these are usually managed by our primary caretakers, our partners and children and family environment. And with the sort of postmodernist decomposition or deterioration, if you like, of the family structure, where the nuclear family is probably where we all are in the Western world, but large extended families are no longer a major source of support. We are entering an era where we need to rethink our social values, and we'll be focusing on some of that tonight. changes significantly. By 2025, in most countries in the world, anywhere from 20 to 30% of the population will be 65 years and older. This is the sort of classical epidemiological definition of old age. Completely not biologically based. 65 doesn't, you celebrate your 65th birthday. It's not you wake up the next morning and you're way older. You're not. Biologically, it doesn't make any sense, but it's an historical definition, and we keep to it because if we need to compare current data and information and studies to what has been happening 20 and 30 and 50 and 100 years ago, we just have that data coded according to that definition. So we just keep that definition. There have been sort of trying to divide old age into three main phases. What we call older adults, which are 65 to 75, the elderly, 75 to 85, and the oldest old, which really sounds bad, but that's 85 and whatever, and the rest of the lifespan. And we can see great differences between these three groups. So just saying that, all the elderly are the same is completely mistaken, but there we are. So 65 years and older, in about a decade, 1 in 5 or even 1 in 4, or even in some countries 1 in 3 people will be 65 years and older. By 2060, which is sort of the next generation after 2025, anywhere from 30% to 50% of the population in most countries will be over 65. That would be a complete change in the way we behave, we shop, we market, we advertise, we provide medical services, we enjoy life and the arts and food. Everything will be in flux. The world will no longer be the domain of young people who are just young. Doesn't make them wiser, does it? Anyway, that change promises, I hope, based on very small studies, promises that we probably have a much more peaceful world. It has been shown repeatedly in historical studies that only elderly statesmen are capable of making peace negotiations. Younger leaders are more prone to conflict and show of strength. And as people age, psychologically our ability to both contain opposing ideas and paradoxes and live well with that, but also our ability for love and empathy increases significantly compared with younger people. So there is hope that the world will change and be a more peaceful place. Let's hope so at least. It is quite hard to imagine someone who is like 92 and still terrorist and into killing people. That doesn't usually happen. Because of that change in our psychological capacity to engage in dialogue and to hold two different opinions in our mind and see how they are both should be weighted. So elder statesmen are more prone to make peace negotiations and to come to terms with opposition than younger people. But as we age, it won't be all brilliant, because currently, if you take everyone who is elderly, about 1 in 9 people are suffering from dementia. We'll define that in a minute, but sort of for want of a short, completely wrong definition for memory and cognition problems. So it's 1 in 9 people currently, but if we don't do anything about the prevalence and the growing rates of Alzheimer's disease, our grandchildren, when they reach old age, 65 and older, will have to struggle with 1 in 3 of them having dementia. So we really need to make a change, not only for ourselves, but for future generations. And the most common of the dementias is Alzheimer's disease. That's why we are focusing on that also, because more than 90% of research on prevention focuses on Alzheimer's disease for various reasons which I won't get into because they're unbelievably boring and have to do with pathophysiology and histological changes in the brain. But we have been focusing for the last 110 years on studying Alzheimer's disease as the classical, common, archetypal dementia. So mostly when we say, something or other about dementias, we actually mean Alzheimer's disease. They are sort of, not scientifically a synonym, but our jargon is sort of, it's easier to say dementia than Alzheimer's disease. And last but not least, as you can see here in the title, major cognitive disorder. The word dementia won't come up in the definition of Alzheimer's disease or any other disease of aging that affects our memory or cognition, because the American Psychiatric Association, which defines diseases and disorders of the brain, has decided in 2013 that dementia is a stigmatizing word or name, and it shouldn't be used anymore. Because literally dementia in Greek means no thinking. And we don't think people stop thinking. So that's not a good description, but the word has been around for so long that it's probably be very hard to disengage from using the word dementia, although there are some brilliant studies showing that once you have redefined or renamed a disease, you can change public and personal attitudes toward it. The word schizophrenia, for example, a very heavily sort of emotionally loaded word referring to a very, very severe mental disorder. The word schizophrenia literally in Japanese has such a bad meaning that people that are diagnosed with schizophrenia are usually so stigmatized and ostracized that they don't seek treatment, and they just sort of become lonely, very lonely, sometimes homeless, and sort of excommunicated. And the Japanese Psychiatric Association about 12 years ago decided to change the word formally, so they applied to, I don't know who you apply to in a government to change the name of a disease, but they changed it to a disease that I couldn't pronounce the name in Japanese, either of schizophrenia or the new name, but the new name sort of translates into a struggle with mental issues, something like that. Now, that sounds sort of better, I guess, and it has, over the last 12 years, changed completely the trajectory and the number of people who are coming in to be treated and are sort of not happy, but they are okay with the new name and being treated for that. So when we change a name, it does have an impact. So we are not going to use the word dementia anymore. I will probably relapse and use that word because I grew up and went to med school when dementia was the name, so very hard to unlearn something. The new sort of title would be major cognitive disorder, but dementia for all purposes, if you like. And this is the definition of dementia, so because I can't really see it well from here, I'll try without the microphone. Do you hear me? That's okay? Or do I need a microphone? I'll try to shout. Anyway.
You need the mic.
Need the mic. Okay. Yeah. Okay, I'm fine from here. Okay. No, that's okay. I think we're okay. Anyway, how do we diagnose a dementia or a major cognitive disorder? We need evidence of significant cognitive decline from a previous level of performance. So it can't be something that has been there forever. That means that, for example, someone who is born with intellectual disability won't be diagnosed as suffering from dementia because that cognitive problem or decline has been there since birth. Okay? Now the decline is from a previous level of performance in one or more cognitive domains. For example, complex attention, like our ability to do complex arithmetics or mathematical equations, for example. Executive function, driving, making a will, making financial decisions, learning in any form and shape, and memory, which is the classical sort of problem we are faced with usually when someone is diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. There is a decline in language ability. Language becomes very restricted. Sentences are way shorter. And when we test people on their vocabulary, they have sort of lost quite a lot of the words that they used to understand and use when they were understanding or expressing themselves. Perceptual motor function, so people find it very difficult to dress or tie a shoelace or shave or even eat, because they can no longer either recognize the food as food or use the utensils to bring the food into their mouth and chew. Sometimes they bring the food into their mouth and they don't chew because they forget, motorically forget, if you like, the actual act of eating. And there is a decline in social cognition, in our ability to be integrated in a meaningful social way. How do we greet someone? How close do we stand to someone when we talk? What are the proper etiquette in a certain society, and the rituals and the way we are part of a larger group of human beings. So one or more of these domains has declined. Declined, when we say declined or impaired, we mean in comparison to the normal level for that age group. So we have norms for all of those functions, and we test, and we usually become really, really worried if someone scores 2 standard deviations below the norm. That means that they are in the lowest 5% of performance for specific tasks. For example, if I wanted to test your ability to generate words, I would ask you to call out loud all the words that you can in 1 minute that start with F or B or whatever, T. Now, it's not that difficult for most of us. We can do that easily. And the cutoff is that most people can generate more than 12 words in a 1 minute period that start with F, for example. You can test that at home for yourselves. So 2 standard deviations below that norm would mean that people are able to produce 9 or less words. So you can see how the poverty of speech comes into play. If you can't generate many words, how can you come up with sentences that are complex and interesting, etc., etc. So we test that, and people have 1 or more cognitive domains which have declined. In the past, we used to demand for the diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease that one of the cognitive domains affected would be memory. But we have learned over the last 20 years that people can appear to or be tested, and they have perfect memory in the sense of declarative memory. You ask them questions about, what is their date of birth, or what is today's date, or who is the President of the United States, that funny man with a different sort of unusual hair color and hairdo. But they can give you the perfect answers for that, but they do really badly on other cognitive domains, and the memory problem sort of surfaces further down the line when the disease progresses. So that would be very unusual, because the usual presentation is that people with Alzheimer's disease start off by having memory problems. Now, everyone has issues with memory, so people are really worried. They're saying, where did I leave my reading glasses? Well, that can happen to anyone over the age of 50. That doesn't mean anything. And you usually find them rather easily when you look for them. Most of us forget them because we just push them up on our foreheads, or we left them, by our bedside where we were reading before we fell asleep. But if you forget your reading glasses and you find them in the freezer, that's worrisome. You need to see someone, your GP, about that. So that would be the sort of memory problem that we are really worried about, not just people saying, I forgot, I always forget my partner's birthday, so, but that's not a decline from previous level of functioning. I never could. Anyway, most of us men don't seem to remember that sort of item in our memory. Now, that in itself, just having a decline in memory or language or orientation or social cognition doesn't mean much. It has to be associated either with concerns or with a knowledgeable informant, someone who really knows us, a partner, a child, a colleague at work, or the clinician, that this decline is significant. When we say significant, we mean that that decline or deficits interferes with our capacity for independence in everyday activities. So it's not like you forget something, but you just get along just fine by making lists or little reminders, and hasn't affected a single domain of your life. That decline has to affect our functioning in our everyday activities. So paying bills or managing medications or driving late at night, which is quite a complex cognitive activity, because there are very few cues to show us the way, and walking a car, and at the same time, sort of planning the route and responding appropriately to road signs and traffic lights and other cars on the road. That's quite a complex task for the human brain. Men tend to think that they do that really well. They don't, but anyway. So if any one of those deficits, and there are usually more than one, interfere with our ability to perform everyday activities, we are really suffering from a dementing disorder. If we know the reason for that, and the most common reason for that would be Alzheimer's disease, then we can say that someone is suffering from major cognitive disorder or dementia due to whatever the physician who is making the diagnosis is thinking that the reason is. So it can be dementia due to Alzheimer's disease, or dementia due to Parkinson's disease, or dementia due to AIDS, or dementia due to syphilis, or dementia due to alcohol abuse, etc., etc., etc. But basically, all the dementias are defined in the same way. It's only the reason why they have affected our brains adversely in that way that makes the difference in the illness definition, but not in the core understanding of what has been happening to our brains. So Alzheimer's disease is the cause of about anywhere from half to 60-65% of the dementias. That's why it's so important to focus on that. Other reasons for dementia, there are about 128 disorders that can express themselves in this way, but the most common is Alzheimer's disease. So now that you can diagnose that, please don't do that for yourself. People often go online or sort of seek out criteria, and they go back to their GPs and say, oh, I know what's happening with me or my partner or my father or whatever. I've diagnosed them as suffering from whatever. Don't. A, because we don't really appreciate people taking our jobs away from us, but more importantly, because it is such a life-changing diagnosis. It should be seriously and professionally undertaken by someone who is an expert in the field. And in most countries, the first gatekeepers would be GPs. They are really proficient and intelligent, and they can make the diagnosis. And if they can't, and they find, that it's a more complex presentation or different than the usual presentation, they would refer the patient or the suspected patient to an expert, either a geriatrician, a neurologist, or a psychogeriatrician, and that service is available here in Dunedin Public Hospital. We have a brilliant memory clinic, so if a GP is unsure, he would refer to the memory clinic, and if you don't forget your appointment, you'll show up in time. Now, why do we need a new model of prevention? I won't get into the nitty-gritty of why that is, but the message is that we are not going to have a cure for Alzheimer's disease anytime soon. Probably not in our lifetime, and some of the skeptics are saying probably not in the next 100 or 200 years, even with the great advances in medicine. For the simple reason that we have absolutely no idea what causes Alzheimer's disease. Since we have absolutely no idea what causes it, we cannot design a medication that would cure it. So that's the main reason. Second reason is, over the last 25 years, over 2,000 and 500 new medications were tested for Alzheimer's disease as a possible cure at a cost of 25 billion American dollars, with the participation of about 96,000 clinicians and researchers and just over 250,000 patients, and every single one of those 2,500 drugs failed. Not a single one was positive in its effects on reducing the cognitive burden of Alzheimer's disease or reversing the disease process. Again, we can't design molecules that will cure something that we don't know what we are designing them for. We don't know what causes Alzheimer's disease. We have absolutely no idea. And the second reason is not only don't we have an idea what's causing Alzheimer's disease, we do know that whatever it is begins the pathological process about 35 to 40 years before the clinical diagnosis. So it doesn't make sense that you'd be able at the age of 80 to take a tablet that would reverse a process that started damaging your brain when you were 40. Our bodies don't work that way. They can't recover that way. And every single attempt to produce a vaccination against Alzheimer's disease also failed miserably at the cost of quite a lot of human life, because vaccinations for Alzheimer's disease actually caused in clinical trials quite a few deaths. So not very optimistic in that arena, and that's why we need prevention. But our understanding of prevention, which is completely different from our understanding of cure, is based on a very simple assumption that in order to prevent a disease or an illness, we really don't need to know much about it. We don't need to know the why we have Alzheimer's disease. We just need to know who are the people who are affected by the disease, what characterizes them, compared to the people who are not affected by the disease. So then we can tease out what we call risk and protective factors. So if we find out, for example, which is a completely nonsensical example, the people who are blue-eyed never have Alzheimer's disease, all we have to do is make everyone in the population have blue eyes and no one will have Alzheimer's disease. As simple as that. And it is as simple as that, because we know that there are 12 or 13 risk and protective factors which account for about 70% of the cases of Alzheimer's disease. And I'm talking about modifiable factors. There are some factors that cause Alzheimer's disease or are a risk for Alzheimer's disease that will be more accurate, but we can't modify them. For example, age. The older you are, the higher your risk of Alzheimer's disease. So at 65, the risk of Alzheimer's disease is about 1 or 2%. At 85, the risk is about 45%. So while you could say, if you were, one of those people who tend to be cynical, just, have people put out of their misery at 66. No one would practically have Alzheimer's disease, but that's not a good way to go about solving the problem. And we cannot stop the aging process. We can't reverse it. We can slow it down significantly, but still our bodies and our brains age. So that's a non-modifiable risk factor. We can't do anything about it. And we know a little about the genetics of Alzheimer's disease, and we can't change those yet. We don't have good enough genetic engineering interventions. But we do know a lot about the modifiable factors. So if we can change those, can we significantly change Alzheimer's disease? Yes. The UK government estimates that we can prevent Alzheimer's disease from affecting 35 to 40% of the people who are suffering from it if we put in place good interventions. So what are those risk factors? We have a good acronym for them. They are called the LIBRA, Lifestyle for Brain Health Factors. And this is a new model for dementia prevention. And you can see the risk factors here. And some of them are classics. Diabetes. Diabetes is really bad for your brain. Some diabetic researchers call Alzheimer's diabetes of the brain. The association is so profound and significant statistically. So if we can control very well or prevent diabetes, and we can do that to a degree, we'll also be positively rate of Alzheimer's disease in the population. Obesity. If we could get people to try and keep to a normal weight, that'd be brilliant. We'll prevent quite a few cases of Alzheimer's disease. And if we can test and treat hearing loss in midlife, people are starting to lose their hearing, we can prevent about 7% of Alzheimer's disease. So there are many risk factors. Today we'll be talking about social isolation, which is one of the major risk factors for Alzheimer's disease. And in 2 weeks we'll be talking about diet, which actually affects nutrition, affects obesity and diabetes and sometimes even our blood pressure and certainly our heart disease and kidney function. So it's in the infrastructure of preventing quite a lot of disorders. And we know that nutrition is unbelievably important. 20 to 25% of cancer cases are preventable if we were just able to change our nutrition. So we'll be talking about that in 2 weeks. But today we'll be talking about some of the preventive strategies that are related to the fact that we live not as individual single organisms, but as part of a smaller or greater social group. And that is probably one of the unique characteristics of our brains. So loneliness. Until about 1998, that's not that far ago, about 20 years ago, you couldn't find a single study or research about loneliness in the medical literature. We just didn't think it was relevant to physicians of any specialization to know about loneliness. We thought, well, that's something that social workers have to know about, or maybe psychologists or counselors or NGOs, people who volunteer, but that has nothing to do with medicine. In 1998, a group of researchers were able to show that loneliness actually kills. It's one of the great risk factors for dying too young. If you are lonely, it will kill you eventually. I mean, not eventually in the sense that you will age, but your chances of dying, if you are lonely, are way greater than someone who's same age, same education, same gender, same socio-economic status, just as intelligent or healthy as you are. If you are lonely, it will kill you. Loneliness is a major risk for dying. Its effects on the bad effects or the adverse effects on our bodies and brains is greater than that of smoking or high blood pressure or overweight. It is what we call the silent killer. So that sort of shook the medical institutions around the world, these findings, and they were replicated all over the world. It doesn't matter where you go or what culture you belong to. If you are lonely in that cultural subjective definition and that emotional sense, it doesn't matter if you have many people around you. It doesn't matter, on the other hand, if you are alone. If you are lonely, subjectively, as an emotional perception of your status in relation to other human beings, you are really in trouble. So we'll be talking about loneliness and a very closely associated issue, a purpose in life. And these two are great modifiers of Alzheimer's disease risk. So the social brain. Our brains are a social organ. And we know when we have started to be able to look at the functioning brain within the living human being, which is not something that is, just minor. We were unable to image, to demonstrate the brain until quite a short time ago. So when Röntgen invented or found the X-rays, we were able to see bones, and with some modifications to Röntgen or X-ray technology, we were able to see some other internal organs. But when you take an X-ray of the skull, you can't see the brain. The brain doesn't stop the X-rays from going through because it is such a fatty organ, so we were actually unable to demonstrate the brain. So finally someone came up with a brilliant idea and invented the brain CT, computerized tomography, and we were able to see the structure of the brain within the living organism, which was quite a breakthrough in medicine, and it changed the way we practice psychiatry, neurology, and neurosurgery, but still it was only our ability to have an image of the structure of the brain. We really wanted to know the function of the brain. So that came along quite a few years later with our ability to use what we call functional MRI. So nowadays we can have someone put into an MRI machine, their head, and we can have them perform certain things like whatever, produce a list of words, or sing, or solve a mathematical equation, or gamble. Because in the machine you can have a little sort of screen, and you can operate a computer from the machine while you are having your brain scanned with an MRI, so we can see what people's brain are doing while they are making a decision on whatever, on playing poker, or investing in the stock exchange, or reading a legal document, or enjoying poetry, or whatever. Now that was a huge breakthrough in our ability to understand functioning of the human brain, but it also brought us quite a few paradoxes. So one of them has to do with the social brain, and actually the regions which are involved or are activated when we are engaging in social interaction are in essence the very same regions which are responsible for the production and maintenance of our memories. Now that's not really surprising. Our social brain is able to remember not only in the sense of remembering a face and a name, but also the social standing of about anywhere from 100 to a maximum of 200 people. Because in evolutionary terms, that was the size of sort of an average human tribe. We can't remember the social hierarchy of more people than that. Some of us can, but most of us don't. So they need to remember not only a face, but what does that face stand for in a social way? Is that my father or my mother? Is that an enemy or a friend? Is that someone who will support me? Is that someone I have to be suspicious of? Is that someone I'm going to be working together? Is that a peer in my peer group? Is that someone I may wish to date or be attracted to? Our brains have to make all these sort of decisions, if you like, or calculations based on memories and knowledge, social knowledge. And some of the findings are simple, but some of them are unbelievably funny and complex to understand. On average, the taller you are, the higher your chances of being elected to the US Senate or to be a president of the United States. Now that's true in all societies. Men who are higher than average are more politically popular. Maybe Napoleon was an exception in France many years ago. He was quite a short man. But, so you think about that, and there are people who are trying to explain such findings, but socially, when we grow up and someone who is taller has that mantle of authority about it, it's very difficult to imagine a midget running the US. I don't mean that in a racist way, but that's the way we are developed as social creatures. And there are many other unbelievably funny findings that have to do with our ability to locate ourselves within a social network in a social context. What does it mean? What are the gestures and the smells and the sounds that other people make? What do they mean to us? Not as a survival instinct, but what is placing ourselves within a larger context than just our individual self. Now, this is very hard for our brains to develop and to maintain. So there are quite a few areas, most of them in the limbic area of the brain, and the limbic area of the brain has to do with memory and emotions. especially with emotional memory. And you probably all know intuitively that if a memory is attached to an emotional moment or feeling, you will remember that better. So, if something is just, sort of plain, doesn't have any emotional loading to it, we find it more difficult to remember. We certainly remember a huge fight or a lovely birthday surprise because they were associated with that, either being frightened or being scared or being very joyful or ecstatic. So we will remember that way better. We need to keep those social networks information in our brain in order to function, but also when we start to be socially isolated or to disengage from social interactions, these social networks begin to deteriorate and their functioning is becoming more and more impaired, and that eventually affects our risk of having Alzheimer's disease by about a factor of 3. So if you are lonely, your chances of having Alzheimer's disease are about 3 times higher than that of someone of same age, education, blah, 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 comparison person that is not socially isolated. So, especially loneliness is a killer for older people, and after the 1998 breakthrough in our understanding of the importance of social integration for the health of human beings, about 6 years ago, a research group in Scandinavia was able to show that if you suffer from loneliness, you are at a very high risk of dying, especially for the elderly. So the research is there and it's quite robust, and currently with Dr. Sharon Leach, who is one of our general practitioner researchers and a brilliant physician herself here at the School of Medicine, we are trying to replicate these findings here in New Zealand, and it looks like, unfortunately, that's true. It's probably true everywhere. So, in about nearly 5 years follow-up, just about 10% more people would die if they're lonely than compared to people who are not lonely. So 31% compared with 23 is just about a 30% increase of your chances of dying if you're lonely when you're elderly. That's a lot. That's quite a lot. It's, as I said, way higher than smoking or blood pressure or heart disease. So scientists who came around to that call the field of the social brain relational neuroscience, the science of our relationships. And it is the intersection of interpersonal neurobiology, relational cultural theory, and neuroplasticity. And neuroplasticity is the key word for prevention of Alzheimer's disease. Our brains are a very plastic organ, not in the materialistic sense, but in the sense that they can change their function. And that can affect their structure, but that's not really important. What's important is the ability for our brains to change their function. And they can do that easily, and they actually do that all the time. The way our brain functions one day isn't similar to the next day, not in the sense that there is just this, sort of rhythm to our brain functioning, but in the sense that our brains all the time are being changed by information coming from the outer world or from our inner bodies and our inner psyche, but especially from social interactions. So we can really change, and we see that mainly when we are looking at the development of our children, how they change as human beings. And not just because they have more information, but because things have changed. So we have seen, for example, that children who are suffering from attention deficit disorder, hyperactivity, or ADD, or whatever you like to call them. So when they are untreated, they really get on terribly bad with their peer group. They get in fights, they're not popular, teachers don't really like them, and they sort of seem to be a source of trouble in school or when they're whatever, in the rugby clubs or wherever you find them. But once we treat them and their attention returns to normal and they are able to start synthesizing that social information, they are well integrated within their peer group. So their brains are able to make the necessary changes and learnings which make them sort of friendly, regular kids. And the same is true for us as we age and as we go through the life cycle. And the networks that we were able to see on MRI and other imaging techniques of the brain, like single photon CT or PET scans, positron emission tomography, and whatever other ideas the engineers come up with and sell us for quite a price, quite a few millions, each of those machines, but are worth it. And what has emerged is that the network of our relational brain is necessary for our lives, because when we are lonely we die, but it is the infrastructure of our memories and our cognitive functioning. And that has to do a lot with the way that we are being raised. And one of the great, at the moment, theories, but probably makes sense, is that the rate of Alzheimer's disease is increasing tremendously in the Western world because we are becoming more and more and more individualistic and less and less and less social animals. And that, if you like, drive to individuation and just stand on your own 2 feet and just be a self-made man, whatever that means, is complete nonsense in any way you could look at it as a psychiatrist and as a neuroscientist. That drive has changed the way we interact with partners, with kids, within our families, within our society, within our peer group and working relationships, and that has increased the risk of Alzheimer's disease tremendously. And it will be even more pronounced for our children and grandchildren who have already, some studies are showing, have lost their quite a bit of social skills because they have 1,374 Facebook friends, but they haven't had, sort of an interaction, a normal childhood or adolescent playing together, which we used to do, and our parents and our grandparents. They haven't had that ever. So they have plenty of friends on Facebook and they keep texting each other. But it's just amazing. You go out, maybe to a restaurant, you sit down, you see 2 young people having a meal and they're actually texting each other. They go out to text each other, they don't even, sort of lift their heads off the iPhone or whatever, the Samsung, and look at each other. And that's really bad business. Research is showing that is damaging the social networks in their brains. It is reversible, but it's hard work to reverse that effect. And that is probably our changing concept of what we are. The emphasis of individualism has probably been one of the great contributors to the epidemic of Alzheimer's disease. Because if you age without a really solid, good social relationship network operating in your brain, you are way more liable to have Alzheimer's disease. And we seem to really aspire to in the Western world, to the following definition of development. I mean, human development from childhood to adolescence and to adulthood. This is a process, the process of development describes separation from others as a sign of maturity. Individuals in this model are able to stand on their own 2 feet. So we are born dependent, obviously, on our parents, probably more dependent than any other young organism, and it takes us quite a long time until we are able to safely care for ourselves in the sense of able to mobilize and get food and shelter for ourselves. It takes us just so many years. I mean, even a 2-year-old baby won't be able to care for themselves, or 5 years old. So it takes us a long time, more than any other mammal or organism, but the increasing independence and individualism that is fostered by modern parenting styles and schools and our society have damaged the part that makes our relationship with our culture and our people and with other animals of our kind, our social peers, that has been greatly damaged. And not that I'm sort of dreaming about the ideal East, but in Africa, in most of Africa, in quite a large part of South America, and in India, China, and other Eastern countries, relationships are the central issue of raising children. That's where the focus is, how you are part of something that is greater than yourself. Individualism is not the face and being all. You are part of a group, and if you ever have the chance to travel to Burma, to Myanmar, you can see that in action. You can see how every village, every town is connected with a Buddhist monastery, and at 5 o'clock in the morning, people stand outside their homes, the mother, the father, and the children, and they are waiting with a little present of food for the monks to come down and walk through the streets of the city or the village with their bowls of empty bowls, and they give them their food, and that is the food that the monks would have for that day. They won't have any other. And that interdependence, because the monastery is actually also the school. So where you go to learn is where you donate your food. And at 11, everyone has to leave formal schooling and go to a monastery for a year, and again at 18. So there is an interdependence that we don't see so much of, or hardly any, in the West. And that is true not only for Buddhist or Eastern traditions and cultures, but also, as I said, for African cultures and South American cultures. So the more sophisticated the social network that we need to navigate ourselves within, the better the creation of memories and their maintenance in our brains. Because if I just have to know the rules of navigating my social life around my family, and maybe try to be somewhat nice to my patients and colleagues, that's not a lot of social interaction. But if I have to navigate social interaction with the whole village, or with a whole larger group of people on whom I'm dependent and they are codependent on me, that makes my brain function superbly better than someone who is just maintaining a very small social network. And our brains are plastic, and they are able to contain that complexity of social interactions. So, in the East at least, when someone is separated from his peer group, pain, psychological pain, but also physical pain, is generated. And that pain is a signal that something is wrong. And people will, of course, react to that. So there is a whole physiology of the pain of social and the pleasure of social interaction that we need to know about. And as I said, it's the sort of use it or lose it theory. If we don't use those neural networks that are helping us to orient the infant to their mother and other caregivers, and the positive responses that we get when we interact correctly with our mothers and our sibs and later with our peer groups, are immensely important to keep that interaction as a positive sign. And that's where we learn our trust. The first year of life sets the basic trust versus basic mistrust network in our minds. So infants who were not able to interact in a positive way with their primary caretakers, with their mother mainly, but also their father, although if you believe Freud, that's a footnote, who knew nothing about the human psychology, but was a great